Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk again about public speaking because, again, it's one of those things that we have such great fear of. But the truth of the matter is, it's a process that anyone can learn. The idea of the natural born speaker doesn't exist. I mean, no one pops out of the womb doing grand oratory. But the thing of it is we have to understand that we can all do it. We just need to get through two basic things, preparation and practice. And if we can work on preparation and practice, we're in good shape. Relatively speaking, you still have to get over those nerves, but if you want to find a way to stop the nerves, preparation and practice. So let's talk today about those kind of things. Let's talk about the practice part because we focused on preparation in a couple other videos. Let's talk about the practice part. Now, before we move into practice, let's have a proper understanding of what we're doing. We're just doing public speaking. We are giving a speech in public, something that we do every day. We're always speaking in public, speaking in public, But hey, I'm not always at a podium. There's no law that says you have to be at a podium to do public speaking. It's like, well, I'm not standing up. I'm sitting at a table talking with people. Well, there's no law that says you have to be standing up to do public speaking. Public speaking is just a thing. It's that we just do. We speak in public. So that's what it is. Now, if you do get called to, quote, give a speech, it's okay. So maybe there might be a podium there. But think about the difference between public speaking and giving the speech. I'm talking with people around a conference room table or a lunchroom table. Well, if I'm at a podium, I'm literally just standing up versus sitting down. Is that big of a deal? I'm a foot and a half, 2 feet taller, depending on how tall the chair is, right? Is that big of a deal? I mean, that's a mental block. And that's actually not that big of a deal once you start thinking about it rationally. Like, I'm just going from talking with people that I normally talk to, but now I'm standing up. So I'm a little bit taller and still talking to them. Well, aren't they going to be looking at me? Well, they look at you when you talk otherwise. Think how weird it would be if you were at a conference room table or at a lunchroom table and you said, I'm about to talk, I want everyone to look away. That's something that we just don't do. That would be really weird. So that's not how we handle public speaking. We typically, when we talk, people look at us. And when they talk, we look at them. Now, if you're standing up, they're still looking at you. You're just taller. So it's not that big of a deal. Another thing that we need to get past is the idea of a, quote, speech. Whenever I have my public speaking classes, I always try to call them public speaking classes. I don't like calling them speech classes because everyone gets focused on the concept of speech and they freak out instead of first stepping back and saying, wait a minute, you're right. I do speak in public multiple times every day. Right. So once you realize it's something you've already been doing, it's not that scary to take the next step in giving an organized speech. If you just say speech class, I don't want to do speeches. It's like, but you're literally talking right now. So getting rid of that word, it's amazing how much that word can change things. But it's also, again, giving a speech is not that big of a deal. And it's not like I'm teaching grand oratory. When we think of grand oratory, we think of that person who's standing in some special position of enormous power or privilege, like when the president is giving a State of the Union address. This is a once-a-year speech where the President of the United States is addressing not just Congress, but other dignitaries and, through the television, the world. That's a big deal. I'm talking about the entire United States and how the United States has been doing for the last year and what the vision is for the next year. That's a big deal of a speech. Do you really think you're going to have a chance to give one of those speeches? I mean, you might have one of those for your business, but for the entire country and potentially the world? No. Yes, you could become president. Don't let me ruin your delusions if you think so, but you could. Odds are you're not going to be president. So are you going to give this kind of big speech? Probably not. What about standing at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial like Martin Luther King Jr. and you're going to be out there and talking to the throngs of people filling up the entire mall at Washington, D.C., 1 million plus people? You're not going to do that either. I mean, the vast majority of us in life aren't going to do that either. There are very few people who've had that position to be able to speak to the entire mall at Washington, D.C. Not too many people. Probably not you either. So it's just one of those things that when you realize it, that it's not that big of a deal to do my public speaking thing. It's just a speech. It's not grand oratory. All of a sudden you start feeling that pressure start to wash away from you. What a cool feeling that is. Okay, great. Less pressure. The other thing we have to realize too is, as again, preparation and practice. We can't forget the practice part. So once we realize get our brain in the right spaces, like this is not some big grand oratory thing. This is just a speech to my colleagues. I'm used to talking with my colleagues at lunch or at boardroom meetings, whatever. So now this is an actual speech. I'm used to talking to them. Okay, we get past that mental hurdle. What's the next step? Practice. Practice is a huge aspect of the work, because I can prepare as much as possible, but if I never practice, I don't get that put into play. And that's when all the problems come, because people either prepare at the last minute, which is terrible because you don't get to think through the organization. And then, of course, they don't practice either. And that kills you too, because anytime you've played any kind of a sport or done anything, it's the repetitive nature that helps you learn it and get better at it. And that's something you need to do. So you have to practice it and get better at it and try it again and again and again until you're totally comfortable doing the thing. And in this case, giving the speech. So, for example, whenever I practice a speech, I try my best to go through the exact speech itself. So what am I going to say and how am I going to say it? And I go through the words. And you'll find out pretty quickly that sometimes I wanted to talk about this one thing. When it's in writing, it makes sense, but my mouth doesn't want to cooperate. Like anytime you've done like tongue twisters, the Sally sells seashells down by the seashore thing, it's amazing how your mouth starts to trip up. That happens with a lot of common phrases. So again, on paper it looks good, but when your mouth tries saying it and you trip all over it, someone else might not have that problem, but for whatever reason you do. How would you know that if you didn't practice it? Again, I can read it through in my head easily. But when I go to say it, man, my mouth just all of a sudden falls apart and it doesn't work. So that's one of the main reasons why practicing helps, because just to see how your mouth works. And again, it sounds really weird because you've been talking for how many years now? You think you know how your mouth works. Well, there are some times where you come across some phrases that you just trip over them. I mean, there's times when I'm working on these videos that I come across a word like, okay, I'm going to use this word. But then you start to think through, like, how do I really pronounce it? And then there's just some days your brain just says, I don't want to pronounce that word today. Thank you very much. And it feels embarrassing, but it's just one of those things that better to find out in practice and fix it than to just totally fall apart in front of other people. That's where a big fear, like, what if I make a mistake? Well, if you practice, you eliminate a lot of the mistakes. Why do you think sports teams practice and practice and practice? To eliminate mistakes. And if you eliminate mistakes, you improve your chances of winning. Well, same thing with giving a speech. You give it over and over and over and over and over. And again, you just eliminate a lot of the chances of having mistakes. The other the reason why you give those speeches multiple times in practice is that you get more comfortable doing it. Think about riding a bicycle. The first time you ever rode a bicycle, you went 10 feet and fell over and crashed. And then you got on it again and you went 30 feet before you fell over and crashed. And then the next time maybe you went 100 feet before you crashed. And then eventually you get to a point where you just didn't crash anymore. It's not that all of a sudden the bike became a better tool for you to ride on. It's just that you got practice under your belt and you start to realize how to work, how to hold your hands just right, when to pedal, when not to pedal, how to lean, not to lean. And you got the feeling of how the bike works and how you interact with the bike. So just like, how's my speech work? How's my interaction with the speech work? And if I do it over and over and over, it becomes old hat to the point where, when you get on a bike, do you sit there and think consciously about, I got to put this hand here and this hand here, and I got to put this one foot exactly this way? I mean, you don't do that. You just hop on and start going because you've done it so many times. So I don't even think about wrecking when I ride my bike. I mean, my last bike wreck was quite a while ago, and it was my own fault for doing something reckless, and I ended up planting the bike into a tree. I missed the tree, but my bike didn't, and had a very wavy front tire as a result. But it's just one of those things that, that was clearly my fault. I hadn't practiced doing what I was doing, and guess what? A surprise thing came along and I crashed. But typically when I ride my bike, I don't think about crashing. I just get on it and go. I just put my hands where they're supposed to be. I put my feet into the clips and I just start riding. I don't think too deeply about, I better make sure I'm exactly in the right position for this. Why bother? Because I've done it so many times. Same thing with giving a speech. And like I always joke with my students in my public speaking classes that I almost never use notes. And it's not to brag about it. It's just that I've been teaching public speaking since 2005. I can do most of everything from the top of my head because I just don't need notes because I've been teaching the classes so many times over and over. I have no idea how many thousand students I've taught public speaking at this point. So why do I, having notes isn't that big of a deal. It's not scary to me. I just don't need them because I've done it so much. So you want to do that. You want to have that kind of familiarity with your speech, right? Well, just writing it, again, the preparation part, that's getting what you do know onto the paper and organized and structured into your intro, your three main points, and your conclusion. But that doesn't get you further down the road and familiar with what you have. Like, you can spend all the time building your bicycle, polishing it, making it look great, but you got to get on it. And you don't want the first time on it in front of all the people watching you. You want to get on it and practice riding it. So when the curtain opens and there you are on your bicycle, you already have that thing mastered. So that's important. The other thing too is the more that you master it, the more that it's here that you don't even need your outline anymore. So I can help students work on their speeches to the point where they think through how they're going to organize it. They think through the actual item they're going to talk about. They think of their main points. They think of their sub-points. They think of how they're going to introduce it and how they're going to conclude it. And if they work on it, you can take away their outline and say, well, what are your three main points? And they'll say, well, it's this, this, and this. Like, great. So your main point one, what are the sub-points? Well, I'm going to talk about this, this, and this. Great. So it gets to the point where, because you've practiced enough time, that outline becomes just an emergency thing. So if I, for some reason, freeze, I can look down and grab a term and continue talking. That's one of the problems without practicing. You have to look at the outline and you just stare at it. And as a result, you find yourself talking to the outline instead of to us. That's a critical delivery error that happens when you don't practice, because you get so reliant on your outline, you don't look at the people in front of you. And if you want to give vibes of someone who is absolutely unprepared and nervous, lose eye contact. It's just like when you talk with somebody one-on-one, you kind of want them to look at you and you want to look at them because it has that personal connection. Well, it's the same thing with giving any kind of a speech. You want to be able to look at your audience members and talk to them as you're giving your speech. You want to be able to look at them as if they matter. And it's important that I'm teaching you these things or persuading you about these things, and look at them so they feel like they matter. So it's important that we do those kind of things too when we're working on our speeches. The other thing that happens whenever we have our practice happen is we start finding other problems. Now, we talk about the problems with the speech structure where our tongues can trip up, but what about other problems that come along with the speech? Like, for example, length of time. We can write out a speech and we think we know how long it's going to be, but you don't know until you start to practice it. So you pull out a watch or you get a stopwatch off on your phone and just start going and give your speech. And it's amazing how the difference in time passes in your head versus what's on a clock. There are times that you'll finish a speech and you'll say, wow, man, that felt like it went fast. And it turns out it was 5 minutes over time. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize that happened. Or vice versa. You're like, man, that took forever. It's like, no, really, you finished in 2 minutes. Try again. Yeah, it's one of those things that we don't know until we get comfortable with it. Like that first time you get on a bike, every speed feels too fast. Yeah, like, oh my goodness, this feels reckless and dangerous. When in reality, your dad was running along behind you, holding onto the seat the whole time anyway. So you weren't really going that fast, but boy, it felt fast. Speaking feels the same way. Like whenever you feel nervous, you feel a lot of times like you're not going the actual speed that you are. So timing yourself will reveal what's going on. And also, if you record yourself doing your practice, you can find out pretty quickly what's going on with your time. Like when you watch yourself giving this thing, you can see, oh wow, I'm talking really fast. Maybe I should slow down. Maybe I should figure out where to engineer pauses. Maybe I should figure out how to slow down this section. This section is good. Maybe this one could go faster. But you'll learn those kind of things from practice. Another thing that comes into play too is you start to see the issues with technology. I mean, most people today when they're giving speeches, they think about technology because I should have some kind of like slideshow, right? Or I should have this. Well, you find out that whenever people have some kind of visual aid, it starts screwing up the speech. And that's a big problem that happens with visual aids. The number one rule with visual aids is it should enhance the presentation, not deliver it. So people will have a big PowerPoint presentation with tons of words all over it. And as a result, people are staring at it instead of talking to you or watching you give your talk. And then obviously the more complex it gets, the more I feel like I'm reliant on it. So one of the worst things that people do with their visual aid is they talk to it. So if I got a presentation up here on the screen for my PowerPoint, people just whip around and they start talking to it. And next thing you know, instead of talking to the people, you're looking at the back of my head. I mean, how uninviting is that? You want to be able to be looking at people. And the more complex this slideshow is, the more it's going to draw my attention away and away from you. The other thing too is the thing itself might be, I might have a physical object and I turn and I talk to it like it's the thing. It's like, well, the audience is still here. So why are you talking to this thing? Again, you'll find those kind of things that come along with the visual aid. And like I said, the technology, sometimes you have a problem too. Like there's one time I was going to give a speech to all the faculty. And it was one of those things that I thought, like, there's a little bit of weight on this speech. I better practice this one a little bit extra. So what I did, I went to the actual room where the speech was going to be, and it had a little remote control or a clicker, if you're from Western Pennsylvania. It's got a clicker to advance the slideshow. Well, great. So this would be, I'm not stuck behind a desk. I can move around. Wonderful. That's wonderful because I don't like being anchored to a desk anyway. So as I'm walking around, I'm moving my arms and talking, and then I look up, and my slideshow is like 8-9 pages ahead of space. And I'm like, what in the world just happened? I wasn't touching any buttons. Well, it turns out the remote control was broken. Like, when you press a button, there's a little dent that makes it click. Well, that was broken. So if you waved the remote, the button was flopping and just advancing slides. So I'm like talking with my hands and stuff. And every time I move my hand, I'm click, 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 moving the slide. I didn't realize it was doing that until I looked and I'm like, oh no. So let's put that down and let's not touch that anymore because you don't realize how much that comes into play. So I just went back to understanding that if I want to advance a slide, go back to the podium and click the button, advance it, the slide one at a time, because don't trust that remote. It's broken. I would not have known that had I not practiced. So that's a key thing. And then the last thing I mentioned there, real quick, maybe you caught it, is I went to the room where the speech was. One of the best ways to practice giving a speech is to get used to the location. So I'll tell my students all the time, like, look, all of you have to give a speech. Why don't you get a few of your friends together from the class and come to the classroom and practice giving the speech to each other? And they look at me like I'm talking like some kind of space alien gibberish. It's like, you're going to have to talk to them. Why not practice talking to them? That would make total sense. That way, when you give your speech, you've already done this. You've already talked to them in this room. But they don't want to listen because they want to practice alone in their rooms. Fine. At least they're practicing, right? But then they come to a classroom and it's different, because a room is small. Like, so when you're in a small dorm room, it might be a 10 by 10 or 12 by 12 or 14 by 14 room. And, you don't have to talk that loudly. But then you go to a classroom, especially a big classroom that might be, say, 30 feet by 30 feet, or 50 by 50. And all of a sudden you have to project to get across the entire room, and they're not used to it. So, like the room where I'm currently teaching, it's a big room, and they speak very quietly. And the AC system is blowing, and you could barely hear them sometimes. It's like, you need to speak up. I can't hear you. You're used to talking like this in your own dorm room and you're practicing. When you come here, you need to project. And they don't think about that because they haven't practiced that. So being in the actual room matters. The computer. How do I sign into a computer? Well, every room might be different, so I need to sign into that computer. And one of those things that you don't think about when you sign into a computer, the Windows profile has to build for you. So if you've never signed into that computer before, it might be off for 5 minutes while you're waiting for it to load your settings. How embarrassing, that you didn't have that preparation done. You're maybe not aware of how the lighting is in that room. Where's the podium? Where should I put the podium in that room? Can I move it at all? All of these little things that you don't think about come into play when you practice. So if you practice, you can figure out, okay, I know how to sign into the system. I know how to turn on the projector. I know how to lower the screen. Is it an automatic one, or do I have to pull the rope? All of these different things I now know because I practiced in the room where the speech is. That sets up the perfect situation to where you're ready to go because you're comfortable already giving the speech where you're giving the speech. If you have that opportunity, take it. It'll make things so much better. So again, preparation, very important, but practice is critical. Again, you can prepare all you want, but if you've never worked through it, that's where all the little bits and bobbles and problems start shooting up. If you practice, you can figure out, oh, there's a problem, and then figure out how to get around it. So that's the practice part is absolutely critical. So do not overlook it. Write that awesome speech, but then practice it multiple times until you're tired of it, until you don't need your outline anymore, and you can just go totally, you and the audience, no paperwork. Get totally comfortable with it, and then if any bumps come up, no problem, because you can handle it because you've practiced it multiple times. That's what I have for you today. So thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.